Hi, everyone. This is Johari Shuck with Your Black Education, and we have conversations with educators from across the country to talk about the education of our children, and in particular, our black young people. So today we have as our guest Dr. Carolyn Hall, and she's a professor at Spelman College, and she's going to talk about how to make our children thinkers so that by the time they get in her classroom, they are better equipped to deal with the rigors of college life. So, Dr. Carolyn Hall, can you just introduce yourself and tell us who you are and what you do?
Gladly, gladly. Again, my name is Dr. Carolyn Hall. I work at Spelman, or teach, not work, but I teach at Spelman College here in Atlanta, Georgia. Before teaching at Spelman, I taught for a number of years at Fort Valley State University, Clark Atlanta University, and Morris Brown College before we know what happened. And so I have about 15 years experience teaching in higher education, but also I worked for a number of years with different programs that fit or seek to help inner city black youth that are first generation college students, those kids who desire to go to college. And I used to do that every summer via a program called Project Graduation Atlanta, and also Upper Bound. And so I have a great deal of experience in working with the African American youth and seeing what that demographic needs and assessing their needs and really learning how to target those specific areas to improve their performance.
Okay. And that's really good. I think it's important that you have that connection to the pre college demographic because I'm in higher ed too, and I understand that everything that happens in college is a direct result of what happens before college. So people need to have a better understanding of what goes on, before that level. So can you speak to like some of the things that you've observed about the pre-college level that some of our children tend to have issues with that might, be difficult for them once they get to the college level?
Okay? Um, I think there are two very specific things that African American youth need to do more of. One, we need to make our children read. We need not use reading as some sort of punishment because I see a lot of people that tell their kids, well, cut off that TV and read a book. And so reading becomes associated with punishment instead of an enjoyable activity or something that enhances them. I think also another thing that we've got to learn how to do as a people, not just in the schoolhouse, but also at home, we've got to learn how to engage and converse with our young people because that engagement, that conversation with adults, and not just about trivia, man. Sometimes talk to your children about what's on the news, what's in the newspaper. Sit down with them in the morning time. It's not on the week because I know the week is a very hectic time. On the weekend, my mother used to sit me down with her when she was reading her newspaper. She'd drink coffee, I'd drink cocoa, or whatever the case may be. But she would engage me. And so I was very used to and acclimated with thinking on my feet. And I think that we've got to sort of teach our children how to be more critical and analytical in their thought processes because that is really missing from not just higher education, but from all levels of education.
Mhm. Now, when you say, I mean, I know what critical thinking is, but that's kind of like a buzzword that people use just to kind of
Mhm.
capture a lot of different things. What, in your expertise, how would you define critical thinking and what that really means?
Okay. I like that you asked me that because I guess critical thinking is one of those words that kind of is almost like that think out of the box. You're not really saying what that means. So when I'm talking about critical thinking, I'm talking about the ability to analyze and assess, not just repeat information back. Give an example. Um, in college composition classes, which is the first English class that college freshmen on every level are made to take because that's one of their core requirements. Well, in those classes, we also do a great deal of reading because reading and writing are inexplicably connected. A kid is not going to be a good writer if they're not a reader, and they're not going to be a writer unless they're a reader. So it's like it's a two-way street. And I think it's so important that when I talk about critical thinking, I'm talking about engaging them in such a way. You say, well, what do you think about what's going on in the news? What do you think about ISIS? What do you think ISIS's agenda is? What do you think about the state of education? What is your teacher doing in the classroom? Now, don't give me complaints, but tell me, what are you all learning right now? Why do you think this is necessary? How do you think this is going to help you in the future? If you don't, what could they do to be more helpful to you in your future? Because these types of questions force them to think. It forces them to read between the lines.
Mm-hmm. And in your estimation, when you have kids in your class or students in your class, how can you tell the difference between the ones that have been raised to question and to think critically versus the ones that aren't? Like, what does that look like in your classrooms?
What does it look like? I'll say this. The kids who have not been raised to converse and think are usually the kids that are very, very quiet and afraid of their voice, right? Because I always tell my kids, I tell them that shyness is from the devil. And I say that because as African American people, one thing that we cannot afford to be is passive. You know, I'm not saying that we've got to be aggressive, but especially as black women, and let me take the feminine component out, the feminist component out. I think that as African American people, we've got to be assertive and intellectual. Meaning, because what happens is a lot of times when people have not been taught to think critically, we see what we're seeing now: a whole bunch of reactionary people who they don't make things happen, but they respond to the things that happen to them. But when we teach them how to think, we give them ways of processing information. We give them ways of dealing with problems and issues. And so in my classroom, I see the kids who aren't engaged in that way are the kids who are usually very, very afraid to speak. And they come to me and they complain and they say, well, I don't want to talk in front of everybody, Dr. Hall, because, I just don't want to look stupid. Well, the problem is, and forgive me for being blunt, is they don't want to look stupid because they know they're not where they're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And some of that is their fault, but some of it is parental, and some of it is educational. And so I think that we've got to address it on every front.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm glad that you said that it's on multiple levels. It has something to do with the parents, but it also, there's responsibility in the schools and the teachers to help, foster these things. Have you experienced in your work, how teachers do or do not support students in learning how to find their voices and things like that? Like, how do we address that part of the problem?
So how do we address them finding their voice?
Yeah, how do you motivate kids that have been really conditioned not to do that? How do you help them look at things in a different way?
Well, I'm a very old school teacher. I make part of that grade. I say, you don't talk, you fail. And I really, I can't really hold that much pressure over that grade in terms of participation, but I think nothing works better than a little fear. And so sometimes I've got to be a little bit, I have to be a little bit scared to get them where I want them to go. I also think that, because this is something that a lot of parents say, when they come and try to talk, sometimes when they have the smothers, meaning smothering mothers, and they want to come try to talk to me about why Susie didn't perform well, which they're not supposed to do. Get the cool, mommy. Susie's 18. Susie's supposed to see for herself. But what happens is that a lot of times parents make excuses for what's not happening instead of addressing the problem. If you've got a shy kid, then you don't coddle them in their shyness. I'll give you an example. People never believe me now. But as a child, and even still sometimes, I can be very shy. And I was a very shy child. But one of the things that my mother used to consistently and persistently do, very, very simple, nothing very intellectual, she said, open your doggone mouth and talk. And so I never really had the chance to say, well, I don't want to, I'm scared, I don't want to, It was not that sort of luxury, because even in the simplicity of that act of her consistently and persistently forcing me to speak, I learned that, if I didn't speak up for myself, there would be repercussions, and not necessarily these very, very negative things, but if I didn't speak for me, who would? And so those are things we have to teach them. And so a lot of times, in addition to using my scare tactics, I also talk to them about the state of the world today, in that we live in a world in which a job is not promised just because of a degree. When people are looking for somebody to hire, this is just like I read an article recently that talks about the number of PhDs that are on welfare and out of work. And you think somebody with all those degrees,
right.
They spend all that money and all that time going to school, and they can't find a job, or they're being, severely underpaid and having to be on welfare. Well, guess what? That means that we have to be such thinkers that we have to be prepared to create our own jobs when they're not jobs for us.
Exactly.
And that cannot happen when we're teaching them to be repeaters and memorizers instead of thinkers.
You're right. I'm so glad you said that. So, I mean, it's hard because in the classroom where these kids are spending a lot of their time, they're not always motivated to speak up and question their teachers, because it's kind of like how we've all been conditioned to just listen to what the teacher says. The teacher is right. And when you get to college, it's a whole different ball game. It's not like that, because everything that we learn is really someone else's interpretation of things that happen. And I think that for us as people, it's really important for us to teach our kids to question things, because things have been like forced on us for like a really long time. Like, what do you think about that?
I think you make some excellent points. I think that, I think the thing for parents to remember, and the thing for other people to remember, is that questioning the teacher does not mean that you're being disrespectful, because it's not what you say, but it's how you say it. I always tell my students, I want you to disagree with me. Because I think that in your disagreeing with me, what you're saying is that I've created my own ideology. I've created my own theory. Thus, what you're saying is I'm thinking for myself, right? And even in that, what I ask of them, if you disagree with me, be able to explain why. Have some sort of foundation other than, I just don't believe that. And so I think that there's nothing wrong with questioning people. I think that even in terms of the classroom, right? We talk about how students are unmotivated and this sort of thing. Some of that is a cop out. It's about, let's get a degree and they end up working for a Fortune 500 company. You're going to be bored as hell at that job. Every day is not going to be fun and exciting or entertaining. There's times when I go to work and I'm like, I'm not about this life today. However, I've been hired to do something, and I have to make it work. I have to make it happen. And so I think that we really have to get them to understand that everything is, and I tell my students this all the time, I went to school to be a teacher, not a dancer, not an entertainer. It just so happens that I have a marvelous personality and make you get a couple of jokes. However, my job is not to entertain. So sometimes you're going to be bored. Not all lunch there's that, you teach in higher education, as do I. When we were working on our graduate degrees, there were times you had stuff to read and you fell asleep several times reading. Am I right?
Yes.
There were times when I had to drink a Red Bull and read some of the things that my teacher would give to me, or I would have to read it 4 and 5 times because I would get just that sleepy because it was just that boring.
Right.
However, nobody cares. At the end, it is about learning. It is about improvement. It is about growth and expansion.
Now, it sounds like, this is something that is deeply, like, embedded in the work that you've been doing for all this time. So when you have gone back and you've worked with Upward Bound and the other program that you talked about, how do you try to do your part to prepare those students for, to be ready for the college level? What are some of the things that you do to help them along in that way?
I try to teach them, at the beginning, I say about the first week they usually hate me. And then by the end, they said, Dr. Hall, can we call you? Can we keep your, can we call you sometime? And I said, hold on, this same kid, you want to hit me with rotten tomatoes the first week of school. So what I do is I try to raise the bar for them. I try not to be, because I always tell them, if ever you're in a classroom and the teachers are the only one talking, you got a problem. How do I learn if you're the only one talking? Learning is an interactive process, meaning that the teacher should not be the only one speaking. The teacher should not be the only one disseminating information. We learn, we create our own paradigms, shape our own thinking based upon not just the teacher, but the responses of those around us, our attempts to process and analyze information. And that may mean sometimes you might be wrong. You may not get it right, but that's okay. You know, there's been plenty of times I've created what I thought was the deepest theory ever. And, you know, and I was like, man, that's so, oh, man, that is so awesome. I can't believe it came from me. And I'll say it, you know, I'll say it out loud when I was in graduate school, and I say it out loud, and the teacher would be like this. And it taught me to constantly evolve, constantly be learning, because the whole job of it is not to go to school just to learn what everybody else has done and know what they know. But I remember doing a little research. Education comes from the Greek educare, which means to change the world. So if the job of education is to change the world, it's not just about getting a job. It's not, we're supposed to be job creators. We're supposed to be decision makers. But if all we're doing is listening to the other people, we're mimicking instead of modeling.
Mm-hmm. And that's really what they want us to do, right? They want us to mimic whatever they, you know, whatever images they have of us as black people. And by they, I mean the people that are making up all these rules and laws and stuff, you know. And that's what they want. And so, like you said, it's important for us to teach our kids in particular that that's not what you go to school for, because that will reproduce exactly what society wants to be reproduced, right?
Right. Very much so.
Yep. And so, I mean, what are some of the things that, you know, like you said earlier, there's different levels to why these problems are occurring where our kids are just, you know, regurgitating what it is that they're being told. What are some of the things on the different levels that you think could be done to help address this? You talked a little bit about what parents can do. Are there other things that you think that parents can do to kind of help their children with this type of thing?
I'll say this. Some of the things that I advocate parents doing, the kid might not like, but they'll be all right. They'll live. It's because it's what happened to me. I remember I was about 15, and this is when my mother really, really started. She always used to buy me books and workbooks and this sort of thing. And my mother was not a college professor. She was not a teacher. In fact, she was a data processor with her high school GED. But she knew that I liked to learn. She saw something in me, and she nurtured that. Her and my father nurtured it. And so they would always buy me books and that sort of thing. But when I got around 15, my mother started to do a different thing. And so for birthdays and different holidays, instead of buying actual gifts, she would buy me books. Now, I'm going to lie to you, I was pissed off at first. But I would read it. I never forget that for my 15th birthday, I wanted some high-top Reeboks and a small Dooney and Burke bag because I just knew I was going to be so fresh. However, what I ended up getting was a copy of Their Eyes Were Watching God by Zora Neale Hurston and The Miseducation of the Negro. And so I was a bit surprised to see those gifts in the bag. However, I ended up reading them because she wasn't going to return them, so I had to make use of them. But what it did was it challenged me to be a thinker. It challenged me to be even more of a thinker because there's some things that I learned from reading Miseducation of the Negro that I still ponder to this day. So if I could challenge parents to do anything, incorporate a life of reading, learning within the Bible. Sometimes, even when you don't want to, cut off the TV. You know, start, and if you don't have books in your home, the library is still free, and they started letting blacks in about 50 years ago. You know, um, you can get books from the library. You can get magazines. There are articles on the internet. You can print them off at work. Something that you want to talk about with your child. And so when you get home, maybe instead of cutting on the TV, just engage them for a while. Talk to them, or you set aside a time that they can watch TV, but also a time that is strictly about reading. Because then you're helping the teacher to help them.
Right. Right. And I think it's something really important that you said earlier on is that unless you read, you're not going to be able to write, and vice versa. And I think that's the part that's really missing because, I mean, even, and I'm sure you experience this when you work with Upper Bound, because I did too, like just the vocabulary of the kids, when they're at the high school level, it's really scary because that's really the foundation of everything that they're going to have to do in college, writing wise, you know what I mean? And so, because our kids seem to be so far behind in a lot of cases, they need to participate in stuff like Upward Bound and other different programs to help prepare them for college because there's so much that the public school systems and private schools are just not getting right, And it's not all their fault. They have a lot of pressures, on that level as teachers and meeting all these requirements and stuff. So it's just kind of like it's very convoluted, why these
Mm-hmm.
issues are the way that they are. So as we wrap up, let me ask you this. From your experience as a college professor, what are some of the things that you think are important for young people that might be watching this to understand about the college experience and about the college learning experience? What do they need to understand, in your opinion?
One, I think we need to demystify this notion that the 4-year university is too hard for them, right? Um, I think that there's so many young people who are incredibly brilliant, but they never entertain going to a 4-year university, or they never entertain going to an HBCU, or even going to school, period, because they think that they just can't do it. So they settle. They think, well, I'll just get a job and work really hard. And and don't get me wrong, hard work is of the utmost necessity. But I think that they need to understand that you can do anything that you apply your mind to. I think another thing that they need to understand is find out what your God-given purpose is, right? Don't just pick a major or a profession based on what mama has told you, based on what your friends say makes a lot of money, because you can make a lot of money and be miserable. You can pursue something somebody else has told you to pursue and you not be good at it. However, if it is your God-given purpose, then when you pursue it, you become so passionate about it, it becomes almost like you could work for free. Because I'm sure you're like me. There are times when 3/4 of the time I absolutely enjoy my job. I mean, every day is a pleasure to go into the classroom. However, the 25%, which encompasses the paper grading, that part I don't like.
Right.
Okay. But, I love, you're right. I love my job. I love it because it is the thing that God created me to do. God created me to be a teacher. And I went to the collegiate level because I remember writing in my high school yearbook when I was in the 11th grade. I didn't know how I wrote it, but I just knew it was going to happen. I wrote going to be a college professor in the AUC. Now, mind you, I'm a little black girl from the hood. I didn't know any professors, but it was something that God had given me, and I decided that come hell or high water, this is a thing that I was going to pursue. There were people who tried to make me be a high school teacher, a middle school teacher. I even got job offers from high school principals, but that was not something I desired to do. And so I say to young people, if it is something you really desire to do, besides being a rapper or a basketball player, find out what your God-given purpose is and pursue that thing with everything in you. And I promise you, you'll never work a day in your life.
Amen. That was a good note to end up on. Thank you so much. I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome.
And I know that your semester probably is just wrapping up or just ended, so enjoy your break. Until next semester.
All
Well, thanks again, and I appreciate you talking with us, and hopefully we'll be in touch soon.
right, all right. You have an awesome day.
Thank you. Bye, Carolyn.
Bye bye.